I had my knees pressed against the back of the front seat and my phone balanced on one thigh. The car had been going north for a while. I didn't know how long at first because the roads all looked the same and I wasn't paying attention to the clock. It was August, and the afternoon sun came through the windows hot enough to make the seat stick to the backs of my legs. Every so often the air conditioner blew cold across my face. Then it would fade, and I'd start sweating again. Mom turned around from the passenger seat. "How's my little fish doing?" She'd called me that since I was a baby. I don't know where it came from. I wasn't a fish. I didn't like fishing that much, and I definitely didn't like swimming in cold water, which was most of the water around northern Michigan. I shrugged. "I'm fine." She smiled at me. Mom smiled when she was happy, but she also smiled when she didn't want to answer something. I looked at the other side of the back seat. It was empty. Irene always sat there on the drive north. Usually she took the window and put her headphones in, even though half the time she wasn't listening to anything. She'd just stare out at the trees and tell me when we were getting close. This was the first August I could remember when she wasn't in the car. Why is Irene staying home? Mom turned back around. Dad kept both hands on the wheel. He didn't look at me in the mirror. He was good at not looking at people when he didn't want to talk to them. "It's your turn now," Mom said. I didn't understand what she meant. "My turn for what?" She looked out the window. There wasn't anything outside except trees and the road and the occasional mailbox leaning beside a driveway. Dad sighed. "Don't make the trip harder than it has to be." I sat back against the seat. "What does that mean?" Neither of them answered. Mom's watch had slid down her wrist when she turned around. I could see something underneath it, thin white lines circling her skin. I leaned forward to look closer. There were scars around both wrists. They were pale and narrow, almost the same color as the rest of her skin. The watch bands covered most of them, but not all. I could see where they went around the sides. Irene had scars like that too. She kept hers under gauze every September. I knew because I had seen her changing the bandages in the bathroom once. She'd shut the door too late, and I caught a look before she told me to get out. I thought she'd cut herself on something. Then I thought maybe it was from work, although Irene didn't have a job where she used tools. Whenever I asked her about it, she told me it wasn't important. Mom pulled her watch back into place. "Little fish," she said. "Just try to have a good weekend." "What happens at the lake?" She didn't turn around this time. Dad drove faster for a few minutes. Not really fast, but enough that I could hear the tires change sound when we went over the rough parts of the road. "What happens at the lake?" I asked again. "You've been there before," Dad said. "Not without Irene. She went every August." "Why?" Dad's jaw moved a little. He did that when he was annoyed. "The family has always done what was required." That didn't answer anything. I pulled up Irene's number and called her. The phone rang until it stopped, then went to her voicemail. I hung up without leaving a message and called again. She didn't answer that time either. Mom watched me in the mirror. "She may be busy." "Doing what?" "Johnny. Why isn't she here?" Mom gave me the same tired smile. "It's your turn now." I looked at Dad. "Did you make her stay home?" He didn't say anything. "Did you?" "Don't make the trip harder than it has to be." That was all I got from either of them. I tried Irene one more time. The call rang and rang. I kept waiting for her to pick up because she usually did, even when she was mad at me. Eventually the call ended and the screen went dark. I put the phone beside me. The farther north we drove, the fewer houses there were. At first there were gas stations and fast food places and little strips of stores. Then there were farms. Then there were only trees. The pine trees grew close to the road in some places. Their branches brushed together in the wind and made a dry sound that I could hear through the closed windows. There were no other cars for long stretches. When one did come along, it was usually going the other way and disappeared before I could see who was driving. I kept checking my phone even though I knew Irene hadn't called. After 4 hours, the road got narrower. The pavement had cracks running across it and patches where somebody had filled in holes with black tar. Dad slowed down and looked at a small green sign near the shoulder. I couldn't read it from the back seat. "Are we there?" I asked. Dad turned the wheel. The tires dropped off the pavement and hit loose gravel. Dust came up behind us and spread across the road. The car shook hard enough that my phone slid off my leg and landed under the seat. I bent down to get it. When I looked out the window again, there were pine trees on both sides of us, and no houses anywhere. The road ran straight ahead through the woods, pale and dusty in the afternoon light. "How far is the lake?" I asked. Dad didn't answer. I looked at Mom. She had her hands folded in her lap. Her watch covered the scars now. I tried my phone again. There was no service. The car kept going down the county road. There wasn't another house where I could ask for help, and there wasn't anybody else around to ask anyway. The road behind us was already hidden by the dust. The car continued toward Black Fen Sanchez. By the time we reached the cabin, it was getting close to dark. The county road got worse the farther we went. The gravel turned into packed dirt in some places, and the car bounced enough that my phone kept sliding around on the seat. I stopped trying to get a signal. There wasn't any. The little bars at the top of the screen had disappeared a long time ago and hadn't come back. Drew's cabin sat by itself at the edge of the trees. It wasn't much bigger than our garage. There was a narrow porch across the front and a short path running toward the water. I could see the lake through the trees. Black Fen Sanchez looked almost black in the evening light. There wasn't any wind on it. Dad parked beside the porch and shut off the car. Nobody got out right away. Mom turned around and looked at me. She had that tired smile on again, the one that didn't mean she was happy. It meant she was trying to make something seem normal. "Come here, little fish." I didn't move. "What happens at the lake?" Her smile went away. Dad opened his door. "Get your bag," he said. I had one duffel bag on the floor behind the passenger seat. Mom reached in and pulled it out before I could. She set it on the ground beside the car. There wasn't much in it. A few shirts, jeans, underwear, and a sweatshirt in case it got cold at night. My phone was in my pocket. That was all I had. Mom came around the back of the car and hugged me. She didn't touch my hands. I noticed because she put her arms around my shoulders and kept my arms pinned between us. Her watch pressed against my back. She held on for a few seconds, then let go and fixed the front of my shirt like I'd gotten it crooked. "Try to have a good weekend," she said. "Why am I staying here?" "Little fish." "Why isn't Irene here?" Mom looked at Dad. Dad was standing beside the driver's door with his hands in his jacket pockets. "Don't make the trip harder than it has to be," he said. That didn't make any sense at the house, and it made even less sense now. I looked past them at the road. There was nothing there except the trees and the dust settling in the headlights. "You're leaving me here?" "Chad will bring you home after the weekend." Dad said it like that settled everything. Maybe he thought it did. He got back in the car and started the engine. I stood there with my duffel bag at my feet. Mom got in after him. She rolled down the window before they pulled away. "Little fish," she said. I didn't answer. She looked like she wanted to say something else. Then she rolled up the window and Dad backed the car around. The tires spun a little in the loose gravel. The car left a trail of dust when it reached the road. I watched the car get smaller between the trees. It took less than a minute before I couldn't see it anymore. I still heard the engine for a while after that. Then that went away too. The cabin door opened. Drew stood there looking at me. I hadn't seen him in a while. He was bigger than I remembered, or maybe the doorway made him look that way. He wore a dark flannel shirt and work pants. His hair had more gray in it than the last time I'd seen him. He looked past me toward the road. Then he looked at the duffel bag. "Bring that inside." I picked it up and followed him. The cabin smelled like old wood and something that had been cooked earlier. There was a small kitchen on one side and a living room on the other. The furniture didn't match. A couch sat against the wall beneath two windows, and there were clocks everywhere. One over the kitchen doorway, one on a shelf beside the sink, another on the wall near the hall. I didn't notice that right away. I was looking at the mud on Drew's boots. He carried my bag down a short hallway and opened a door. "This is where you'll sleep." The bedroom had a narrow bed and a small table beside it. There was one window facing the trees. The glass had gone dark enough that I could see my own reflection in it. Drew put the duffel bag on the floor. I stayed in the doorway. "How long am I supposed to be here?" "Until the weekend's over." "Why?" He looked at me. I waited for him to answer. He didn't. I tried again. "Why am I here?" Drew rubbed one hand over his jaw. His hands were rough and dirty around the fingernails. He looked tired, but not the way Mom looked tired. Mom looked like she hadn't slept. Drew looked like he already knew something bad was going to happen and was waiting for it. He walked back toward the front of the cabin. I followed him because I didn't want to be alone in the bedroom. Outside the front window, the lake was harder to see now. The trees had turned into dark shapes, and the water was just a flat piece of black between them. Drew pointed toward it. "On the full moon night, you do not go down there. I don't care what you hear." I looked at the lake, then back at him. "What am I going to hear?" "Doesn't matter." "Why can't I go down there?" "Because I said so." That sounded more like Dad than Drew. I didn't like hearing it from him. "What do you mean, what I hear?" Drew's face tightened. "You stay away from the dock." "Why?" "Johnny." He didn't say it loud. He said it the way Mom said little fish when she wanted me to stop asking questions. I looked at the water again. There was no dock that I could see. Maybe it was farther along the shore. Maybe the trees blocked it. I took out my phone and called home. The screen showed no service. I tried anyway. The call failed before it could ring. I tried Mom's number next and got the same thing. Dad's too. Drew watched me. "They don't get service out here," he said. "I know." I put the phone on the table beside the bed when we went back to the bedroom. There wasn't anywhere else to put it. The table had a lamp on it, but the bulb was yellow and weak. I set the phone next to the lamp so I'd see it if Irene called. She hadn't called all day. I looked at the time. My phone said 6:30. The clock over the kitchen doorway said 7:10. I thought maybe the phone had stopped updating when we lost service. That happens sometimes. I checked the clock on the shelf. It said 7:11. The one near the hallway said 7:09. They were all about 40 minutes ahead, but none of them agreed with each other. "Your clocks are wrong," I said. Drew was standing in the kitchen with his back to me. "They're fine. They all say different times. They have to stay that way." That didn't answer anything. I walked over to the clock above the doorway. It was an old round clock with a glass front and black hands. I reached up and turned the knob on the back until it showed 6:30. Drew crossed the room before I could lower my hand. He took the clock off the wall. His fingers moved the hands forward. "Hey." He set it back where it had been, 7:10. "Why'd you do that?" "The clocks have to stay that way." "Why?" Drew looked at me for a moment. Then he left the clock 40 minutes ahead and turned away from me without explaining why. The next few hours passed slowly. I stayed in the bedroom for a while after Drew walked away from the clock. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my phone. It still had no service. The time hadn't changed, which I figured meant it was probably right, although after seeing all those clocks I wasn't sure anymore. I tried calling Irene again. The call failed right away. I didn't leave a message. There wasn't much point. If she couldn't get the call, then she couldn't hear the message either. And if she could hear it, I didn't know what I was supposed to say. I was at Drew's cabin. My parents had left me there. Drew wouldn't tell me why. That didn't sound like something I could put in a message. I left the phone by the lamp and lay down. The mattress was thin and had a spring sticking up near my hip. I moved around until I found a spot that didn't hurt, then pulled the blanket over me even though it wasn't cold. I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the cabin carried through the walls. The refrigerator clicked on and ran for a few minutes. Something tapped against the window. Once I heard water moving through the pipes, although I didn't know where the pipes went or why there would be enough water moving through them to make that much noise. I checked my phone again. The screen said 11:40. The clock on the wall outside my room said 12:20. I didn't bother checking the others. I must have dozed off sometime after that because the next thing I heard was a scraping sound in the hallway. It was slow and heavy. Something dragged across the floor, stopped, then dragged again. I opened my eyes. The room was dark except for the weak yellow light coming from the hall. My door was open a crack. I couldn't see Drew yet, but I could hear him breathing. The scraping started again. I sat up and moved closer to the edge of the bed. The floor creaked under my foot. I stopped and waited. Drew didn't come in. I leaned toward the door and looked through the crack. He was in the mudroom beside the back door. The thing he was dragging was covered by a dark tarp or maybe an old blanket. I couldn't tell what was underneath it. It was wide enough to make him walk around it when he pulled, and heavy enough that the floorboards shook a little. He got it close to the wall and left it there. Then he opened a cabinet and took out a pair of hip waders. They were black rubber and looked stiff from being folded up. Drew sat on a wooden bench and pulled them over his work pants. He had to tug hard at one leg to get it past his knee. I didn't know why he needed waders. The lake was right outside, but he wasn't going fishing. It was the middle of the night, and he hadn't brought a pole. I figured maybe there was something wrong with the dock, although if that was the case, he could have waited until morning. He reached up and lifted a heavy canvas hood over his head. It hung down past his shoulders and made him look bigger than he was. The front was dark and flat. I couldn't see his face at all. His shadow stretched across the mudroom wall. I stayed where I was. Drew picked up a bucket with a cover over the top. He carried it in one hand. In the other, he held a coil of thick rope. It was the same kind of rope I'd seen near the wall earlier, only this one looked wet or greasy in the weak light. He opened the back door. Cold air came into the cabin and moved the door to my room a little. The smell of the lake came with it. It smelled like mud and old leaves. There was something else underneath that I couldn't place. Drew carried the bucket and rope outside. I could have gotten up. I could have followed him to the window or gone out the front door and watched where he went. But he was wearing that hood and those waders and carrying something covered in the mudroom. I didn't want him to know I was watching. So I stayed in bed. The door shut. The cabin got quiet again. For a few minutes, I heard nothing except the refrigerator. Then there was a dull sound from outside. Wood creaking, a footstep on the porch, another one farther away. Drew was going toward the dock. I couldn't see the dock from my window. The trees were in the way and it was too dark outside anyway. I listened as the sounds got fainter. Then I heard water moving. Not waves. There wasn't any wind. It sounded like something heavy being pulled across the surface. The dock creaked again. There was a low splash and then another one, louder than the first. I heard the rope slide against wood. I wanted to know what he was lowering into the lake. I didn't get up. The sounds continued for a while. Sometimes there was splashing. Sometimes there was only the slow groan of the dock. Once I heard Drew make a noise, but it was too low and far away for me to understand. After that, the rope scraped across the boards, and the water went quiet. I lay there until I fell asleep. When I woke up, the sky outside my window was gray. I didn't know what time it was. My phone said 6:15 and the clock in the hallway said 6:55. I put on my shoes and went out of the bedroom. Drew was in the mudroom. He'd taken off the canvas hood and it sat on the bench beside the waders. His hair was wet and flattened against his forehead. The rubber waders were lying on the floor with mud smeared up both legs. The covered bucket and rope were gone. Drew was pulling off his gloves. They were thick work gloves, dark with water around the fingers. He set one on the bench and started working at the other. "What were you doing?" He kept pulling at the glove. "Drew." He got it off and put it beside the first one. His hands were red from the cold. There were dark stains around the wrists of the gloves. Not mud. Mud was brown out here, the same brown that covered the floor and the bottom of the waders. This was almost black. "What happened to your gloves?" I asked. Drew looked at them. Then he looked at me. "Nothing." "Why are they stained?" "They got wet." "With what?" He didn't answer. He picked up the canvas hood and carried it toward the kitchen. "Drew, what did you put in the lake?" He stopped with his back to me. I waited. "Go get dressed," he said. I stepped closer to the bench and looked at the gloves again. The stains had soaked into the fabric around the wrists. They looked fresh. Drew turned away from me in the mudroom. I got dressed like he told me to. I put on my jeans and shoes and went into the kitchen. Drew was standing by the stove with a cup of coffee in his hand. He didn't turn when I came in. He looked out the window toward the trees. The cabin was cold in the morning. Not freezing, but cold enough that I kept my sweatshirt on. The lake looked gray through the window. It was flat and still. The dock wasn't visible from the cabin. Drew set the coffee down. "Come on." "Where?" He picked up a tackle box. "The shore." I followed him outside. The shore was just a strip of muddy ground between the cabin and the trees. There were no chairs or picnic tables or anything that would make it look like a place people went to sit. Drew had cleared a small area near the water and put 2 wooden crates there. One of them had fishing line and hooks on it. The other was empty. He handed me a pole. "You bait it first." I knew how to bait a hook. I'd done it before at a real lake with Dad. I pushed the hook through the worm and tried not to look at the part that came out the other side. Drew watched me. "Don't leave the point covered." I moved the worm back. The hook point showed through. "Like that?" "That's fine." He took the pole from me and showed me how to cast. He didn't swing it over his shoulder like I'd seen people do on television. He moved the rod low and smooth. The line went out over the water without making much sound. "Your turn." I tried it. The hook hit the lake with a small splash. Drew looked at me. "Too loud." I barely did anything. "Do it again." I did it again. The line landed a little softer that time. "Better." That was how the whole morning went. He showed me something and then made me do it again until I got it right. Cast without making noise. Reel in without letting the line slap against the water. Hold the pole still. Then he made me sit beside the lake and wait. He sat on the other crate. Neither of us talked. At first I thought he was waiting for a fish. After a while I figured he was waiting to see if I could stay quiet. The water didn't move. The trees made a little noise behind us, but there wasn't any wind over the lake. I wanted to ask him why my parents had brought me there. I wanted to ask what was in the chest freezer I'd seen through the open door of the mudroom. I wanted to ask about Irene and her hands and whether she was hurt. I didn't ask because Drew had told me to be quiet. That didn't mean I stopped thinking about it. The freezer was locked. I knew because I'd tried the handle when Drew went around the side of the cabin to get more line. It was an old white chest freezer with rust around the hinges. The lock was a small brass one through the metal latch. I had no idea what was inside. It could have been fish. It could have been meat. It could have been nothing but old food Drew didn't want me getting into. The lock made it seem like more than that. There was a coil of thick rope on the floor beside it. I'd seen it in his hands by the lake the first night. A metal hook was tied to one end. The hook was bigger than my hand and curved at the tip. It looked like something meant for pulling a boat or a heavy log. I picked it up. Drew came back through the door before I could ask about it. He took the rope out of my hands. "Don't touch that." "Why?" He carried it to the mudroom and put it on a shelf. Then he locked the door. That became normal over the next 2 days. Drew taught me how to bait lines and cast them quiet. He taught me where to sit and how long to wait without speaking. Whenever he left the mudroom, he locked it behind him. If I asked where he was going, he didn't answer. If I asked what was in the freezer, he told me to leave it alone. He kept me away from the dock whenever he could. Fishing was about all I had. I couldn't call home because there was no service. I tried anyway. No call would go through. I checked Irene's number more than once, even though I knew she wasn't going to call if she couldn't get through. The moon got bigger each night. By the second evening, it was bright enough to show through the trees before the sun had gone down. Drew and I were sitting near the shore with the fishing poles between us. I hadn't caught anything. I didn't think there were any fish in the lake, but Drew never said there weren't. He just kept telling me to wait. I put the pole down. Why did Mom and Dad bring me here instead of Irene? Drew kept looking at the water. The Stevenson family has obligations. What does that mean? You'll understand when the moon is full. It'll be full tomorrow. He didn't say anything. So what happens tomorrow? Drew rubbed his hands together. His fingers were rough and cracked from working outside. He looked older sitting there in the fading light. Not old exactly, just tired in a way that didn't go away when you slept. "What happens at the lake?" I asked. "Johnny." "Why am I here?" "You've been told what you need to know." "No, I haven't." Drew looked at me then. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." That was what Dad always said. It didn't make me feel better when Dad said it, and it didn't make me feel better coming from Drew. "Irene went through this, didn't she?" Drew's face changed a little. His mouth tightened. "What happened to her hands?" He looked back at the water. "It's in the Stevenson blood. Every Stevenson child has a debt, and it comes due at 14. Irene paid hers with her hands. The lake keeps what it's owed and gives a life back during each big moon." I didn't understand most of that. "What life?" He didn't answer. "What does it give back?" "Don't ask about things you don't understand." "I understand that something happened to Irene." "She made her choice." "Was she safe?" Drew stood up and picked up both fishing poles. "What do you mean, was she safe?" "Go inside." "Why?" "The dock is forbidden tomorrow night. The moon will be full." "Why can't I go to the dock?" "Because it has to be that way." "What's in the lake?" Drew carried the poles toward the cabin. I followed him. "What lives in there?" He stopped at the porch. For a second, I thought he might answer me. Instead, he opened the door. "You stay away from the dock." "What happens if I don't?" "The thing becomes cruel when an offering resists." He said it quietly. Then he went inside. I stood on the porch and looked past him through the trees. The lake was almost black again. The moon was coming up behind the branches, and its light made a thin path across the water. "Is Irene safe at home?" Drew set the fishing poles against the wall. "Irene refused the family. Stop asking questions if you want the payment to be quick." I couldn't think of anything to say. Drew walked into the mudroom and shut the door behind him. A moment later, I heard the lock turn. About 4 hours later, I was still awake. I'd tried sleeping after Drew locked the mudroom. I lay on the bed and listened to him moving around in the cabin. He washed a cup. He opened and shut the refrigerator. Then the floor creaked a few times and everything got quiet. I figured he'd gone to sleep. The moon was full or close enough to full that it showed through the trees outside my window. The light came in pale and made the room look different. Not brighter exactly, just easier to see the things I didn't want to see. I kept thinking about Irene. Drew had said she paid with her hands. He'd said the lake kept what it was owed and gave a life back during each big moon. He'd also said she refused the family, but that didn't make sense if she'd gone through the same thing as everyone else. Maybe it was supposed to make sense later. That was what adults said when they didn't want to answer you. I got out of bed and opened the door. The cabin was dark. I waited for a while to make sure Drew was asleep. I could hear him breathing from the other side of the wall. His breathing was deep and regular. He didn't move when I stepped into the hallway. I went to the mudroom. The door was locked like it had been every time he left it. I'd checked it before, but I checked again anyway. The knob turned a little and stopped. The lock made a soft click when I tried it. The chest freezer sat against the far wall beneath the small window. Drew had kept it locked since I got there. I'd seen him put fish in it once, although I hadn't seen him catch any fish. He'd come back from the shore carrying a plastic bag and told me to stay outside while he put it away. I'd wondered about that bag ever since. There was a little brass lock through the latch. I didn't have a key. I looked around the mudroom and found a kitchen knife on a shelf beside the back door. It had a thin blade and a wooden handle. Not the kind of knife you'd use to cut a steak. More the kind you'd use to open a box. I carried it to the freezer. The latch was stiff. I pushed the knife between the lid and the metal frame and worked the blade back and forth. The freezer made a hollow noise each time the knife slipped. I stopped whenever Drew moved in the other room, but he never woke up. It took a while. The knife bent before the latch gave way. The lock dropped onto the floor and made more noise than I wanted it to. I froze with one hand on the lid. Drew kept breathing. I lifted the lid. Cold air came out. It smelled like frozen meat and something sour underneath. The freezer was packed with butcher paper tied up with string. Some of the packages were small. Some were much bigger. They were stacked all the way to the top. I didn't know what kind of meat it was. It could have been venison. Drew lived by the lake and hunted in the woods. There were probably a lot of normal reasons to have a freezer full of meat. I tried to tell myself that while I moved the packages aside. The butcher paper was wet around the edges. A few of the strings had come loose. There were dark stains on the paper, and the ice underneath had turned gray. I moved another package. Something flat was lying at the bottom. At first, I thought it was a board. Then I saw the cover. The leather was swollen and cracked. Water had gotten into the pages and pushed them apart. The family name was stamped across the front in faded letters. Stevenson. I looked back toward the cabin. Drew was still asleep. I pulled the ledger out. I had to use both hands to lift it. Water dripped from the bottom edge onto the floor. I set it on the top of the freezer and opened the cover as carefully as I could. The first pages were stuck together. I pulled them apart with my fingernail. The paper tore a little, but the writing underneath was still readable. There were names in one column and dates in another. Each name had a dark mark beside it. Some marks were just lines. Others looked like a small circle drawn with a pen. The dates went back a long way. I recognized some of the names, not all of them. They were people from the family. People I'd heard Mom talk about when she was talking to relatives on the phone. People in old pictures that sat in boxes in our attic. I turned the page. The writing changed from list entries to sentences. It looked like different people had written in the ledger over the years. Some handwriting was neat. Some of it leaned so far to one side I could barely follow it. The first part I could read said the Stevenson family had made a bargain with the thing beneath Blackfen Sanchez. I read that line twice. The thing beneath the lake. The family fed it every August. In return, it spared the children in the surrounding community and kept the Stevenson family from drowning. I didn't understand how those could be connected. I read the sentence again anyway. It said the family's payment was required to keep the bargain. It said the lake had protected the town for generations. There was another mark beside the next name, then another. The entries talked about children being brought to the lake at 14. The thing took a piece by hand. I stared at those words for a long time. Irene had lost 2 fingers. Her hands had been covered when I saw her. She wore a bandage or gauze over one of them and got angry whenever anybody asked about it. Mom had scars around both wrists. She wore her watch over them even inside the house where nobody needed to know what time it was. I'd seen those things before. I just hadn't put them together. I turned another page. There was an entry for Mom, Jenna Stevenson. Her name had a mark beside it. The date was years before I was born. I didn't know what piece the lake had taken from her. I didn't want to know. I kept reading because stopping wouldn't make the words disappear. The next pages listed more people. Some had 1 mark, some had more than 1. The entries said the family had to return every August. They had to bring what was required. They had to keep the lake satisfied. I found Irene's name near the back. Her entry was longer than the others. It said she had been taken to the lake when she was 14. The thing had taken 2 fingers from one hand. She had survived. After that, she was brought back each August because the debt wasn't finished. Irene hadn't escaped. She'd only gotten through the first part. I read the line about her being released 3 times before I understood it. The family had brought me instead. Her place had been given to me because I was 14 now. That was why she wasn't at the cabin. That was why Mom and Dad had left me there. That was why Drew kept locking the mudroom and telling me to stay away from the dock. Irene had refused the family after the lake took her fingers. The ledger said the replacement had to be complete. It said the new child would take the place of the one who rejected the bargain. Irene was free because I was there. The flashlight came on behind me. I turned around. Drew stood in the doorway with the beam pointed at my back. He was wearing his work clothes and had one hand on the doorframe. I couldn't see his face very well. The light was too bright and the rest of the mudroom was dark. I grabbed for the ledger. The freezer lid slipped under my arm and slammed shut. I jumped back. One of the wrapped packages fell to the floor. It hit with a soft, heavy sound, and the butcher paper split along one side. Drew got across the room before I could pick up the ledger. "Give me that." I held it against my chest. "What is this?" "Johnny, why is Irene in here?" He reached for the ledger. I stepped away from him and hit the freezer with my back. "Why did the lake take her fingers?" Drew stopped. I looked down at the open page. Irene's name was still there. The ink had run around the edges, but I could read it. "You brought me here to replace her." Drew's face looked tired in the flashlight beam. He didn't deny it. That was worse than if he'd yelled at me. "Johnny, give me the ledger. What happens at the lake?" He took another step toward me. "What happens when the moon is full?" "The family never wanted you to discover the bargain this way." Drew took the waterlogged Stevenson ledger from me and held it out of my reach in the freezer room. Drew put the ledger under one arm and reached for me with the other. I stepped sideways and kept the freezer between us. The lid was closed now, but I could still smell the wet butcher paper and whatever was underneath it. The room was too small for both of us to move around comfortably. Drew knew that. He stopped trying to grab me. "Johnny, listen to me. Why did you bring me here?" "I didn't have a choice." "Why?" He looked down at the ledger. Water had soaked through the cover and was dripping onto his work pants. "Irene was supposed to come back this year. She already paid. She was marked. That isn't the same thing." I couldn't tell what he meant by marked, but it had something to do with her hand. 2 fingers were missing. I'd seen the bandage. I'd seen the way she kept that hand close to herself when Mom and Dad were around. "She refused to go back," Drew said. "She cut herself free from the family." "How?" He stayed silent. I looked at the ledger. What does that mean? It means she told them she'd rather die than return to the lake. That sounded like something Irene would say. She'd always been the one who got angry first. She was the one who told me not to believe them. I just hadn't known what them meant at the time. Drew shifted the ledger under his arm. The lake wasn't owed another piece, he said. It was owed the rest of her. When she refused, the family had to give it a complete replacement. I stared at him. No. Johnny. No. They brought me here because she wouldn't go back? He didn't say yes. He didn't need to. Drew was bad at answering questions, but he was good at standing there and letting the answer sit between us. I pushed past him into the hall. The cabin was still dark. I could hear the refrigerator running in the kitchen and the wind moving through the trees outside. Drew followed me without hurrying. He didn't have to hurry. There was nowhere for me to go. Why are you helping them? I asked. The bargain protects the town's children. What does that mean? Break it, and the lake collects from everyone instead of one Stevenson. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. You can let me go. Drew looked at me. His face had gone gray in the weak light from the kitchen. I'm sorry. Then opened the door. He looked toward the mudroom. The ledger was still tucked against his side. I warned you away from the dock because the thing becomes cruel when an offering resists. I'm not an offering. He didn't correct me. Drew opened my bedroom door and pointed inside. Go in. No. Johnny. I said no. He caught my shoulder and pushed me through the doorway. Not hard enough to knock me down, but hard enough that I stumbled against the bed. I turned around and grabbed the doorframe. Get off me. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Why do you keep saying that? He pulled me into the room and shut the door. I heard the lock turn from the other side. Drew left the key in the lock for a second. Then he pulled it out. I hit the door with both hands. Drew. He didn't answer. His footsteps moved down the hall. A few seconds later, I heard the mudroom door open. Then it shut. The ledger was going back where he'd found it. I went to the window. The signal on my phone was gone. I moved closer to the glass and held the phone up, like that had ever helped before. One bar appeared near the corner of the room. It disappeared when I took half a step back. There was an unread voicemail from Irene. It had been left that morning. I pressed play. Her voice came through small and scratchy from the phone speaker. Don't believe them. Get to the road. Never go near the water. I'm coming for you, little fish. The message ended. I played it again, then a third time. I wasn't sure she was still coming. I couldn't tell if she'd been able to leave home or if Mom and Dad had stopped her. The last part kept going through my head anyway. I'm coming for you, little fish. I tried calling her back. The call started. I heard one short burst of static. Then the signal vanished, and the call went dead. I stood by the window and tried again. Nothing. I turned the phone toward the glass and held it there until my arm got tired. No signal. I went back to the door and checked the knob. It turned a little and stopped. The lock was on the other side, just like the mudroom door had been. I pulled the bed away from the wall. It was heavier than it looked. The frame scraped across the floor and made a noise loud enough that Drew had to hear it. I kept moving it anyway. The mattress slid sideways and the blanket fell off one corner. I pushed the bed against the door. That didn't make it secure. It was just a bed. The frame was thin metal and the wheels on one side rolled whenever I put too much weight against it. Still, it was better than nothing. I took the metal frame in both hands and worked one end against the lock. I couldn't see what I was doing. I could only feel the frame catch and slip against the door. The full moon was coming up outside. Its light reached through the trees and laid a pale strip across the floor. The room looked almost bright enough to see in, but the corners were still dark. I could hear water from the lake even though the window was closed. Then something thumped at the dock. It wasn't a splash. It was a wet, heavy sound, followed by another one a few seconds later. Thump. Pause. Thump. I stopped working the bed frame. Drew's footsteps came down the hall. He walked slowly. The lock clicked. "It's waiting," he said through the door. "Come quietly, and the collection will stay painless." I pushed harder against the frame. "No." "Johnny, open the door." "No." "The lake will become violent if you keep resisting." I hit the lock with the end of the bed frame. The door shook but stayed closed. "Go away." "Johnny." I struck it again. The metal frame bent a little where it hit the lock. The thumping started again outside. It had gotten louder. The dock creaked between each sound, like something heavy was walking across it. Drew tried the handle. "Open the door." "No." He put his shoulder against it. The bed rolled back an inch. I shoved it forward and held the frame against the lock with both hands. Drew pushed again. The door opened a crack. "Don't make it come inside," he said. I braced my feet against the floor. The opening widened. Cold air came through, carrying mud and old leaves. Something struck the dock outside. Drew forced the bedroom door inward while I braced the bed frame against it. The opening got wider. I pushed against the bed frame with both hands, but Drew was stronger and the wheels kept sliding away from me. Then headlights swept across the window. For a second, I took it for something from the lake. The light moved across the wall and disappeared. Then it came back brighter, shining through the trees and into the room. Drew stopped pushing. "What was that?" I didn't know. I pushed the bed frame again. The door moved another inch. Cold air rushed through the opening. The headlights came closer. They lit up the cabin and the trees beyond it. I heard an engine running too fast over the dirt and gravel. It sounded like somebody had forgotten where the brakes were. Drew turned his head toward the noise. "What is that?" The car hit the back of the cabin. The whole wall shook. The bedroom door jumped open, and the bed rolled backward. I fell against the frame and landed on one knee. Something broke in the mudroom with a loud crash. Glass came down somewhere behind me. Drew grabbed my sweatshirt and pulled me away from the door. I heard another crash. Then Irene was there. She came through the broken doorway with her hair loose around her face and one hand braced on the wall. Her jacket was torn at the shoulder. There was blood on her forehead, but she was standing. "Johnny." She grabbed the bedroom door and pulled. Drew caught her by the arm. "Get away from him." He tried to drag her backward. Irene drove her shoulder into the door instead. I pushed from the other side. The bed frame had damaged the door and Drew had damaged it further by forcing it. The hinges pulled loose with a sound like someone tearing a sheet of metal. "Push!" Irene yelled. I pushed harder. Drew pulled her away from the doorway. Irene kicked at the floor and caught the edge of the frame with her boot. The door bent in the middle. I could see the hall through the gap. "Johnny, keep pushing." I put both feet against the bed and shoved. The frame dragged over the floor. Drew's grip slipped from Irene's arm. The door came free. Irene fell backward into the mudroom. I stumbled after her. Drew reached for me before I could get to her. He caught me around the chest and lifted me off the floor. "Let go." I kicked at his legs. He carried me toward the broken back door. I could see the car through the opening. It had come through the wall and stopped halfway inside the cabin. Steam or smoke was coming from the front of it. One headlight was still on and pointed into the trees. Irene grabbed a loose piece of the broken door. It was a long board with a jagged nail sticking out of one end. She swung it at Drew's side. The board hit his side, and his arm came free. I dropped to the floor. Irene grabbed my hand and pulled me into the mudroom. Drew made a noise and reached after us. She slammed the broken door between us even though it was barely attached to anything anymore. "Move." "Where are we going?" "Out the back." "Where?" She pulled me past the freezer in the mudroom. The door to the dock was at the far end of the mudroom. It was the door Drew always locked when he left. The lock was still there, but the frame had been damaged by the car. Irene kicked it once. Nothing happened. She kicked it again. The door opened a little. The thumping stopped. I looked toward the lake. The dock had been dark when I saw it from the bedroom window. Now something was moving across it. It came up over the edge slowly. First one long arm, then another. The limbs bent in places where they shouldn't have bent and slapped wetly against the boards. Irene pulled the door open farther. The thing dragged itself onto the dock. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't a man. I knew that right away, but I didn't know what else it could be. Its body was long and pale and thin enough that I could see the shape of its ribs beneath the skin. The ribs curved out like the broken frame of a boat. It had 2 arms on one side and something like legs on the other. None of them looked connected correctly. They folded and unfolded while it pulled itself forward. The mouth opened. It didn't open like a person's mouth. 3 separate flaps peeled apart and showed a dark, wet space inside. Then it said my name. Johnny. It sounded like Mom. I froze. I knew that voice. I had heard it in the kitchen and in the car and through my bedroom door at home. The thing on the dock had no face that looked like hers, but the voice was hers. Drew shoved me toward the door. The offering has to be completed. I grabbed the frame. No. He put both hands on my back and pushed. My shoes slipped on the wet floor. Irene turned toward us. Find the rope. What rope? She looked at the shelves in the wall. The hook. Find it. Drew pushed me again. I went through the doorway and landed on the dock. The boards were wet and cold under my hands. The lake was only a few feet away. The thing had stopped near the end of the dock. Its body was half on the boards and half in the water. Drew came after me. I tried to crawl away, but he caught the back of my sweatshirt and pulled me up. The thing reached out with one of its arms. The hand had too many joints. Its fingers dragged across the boards as it came toward me. Irene was still in the mudroom. I heard things falling off the shelves. Johnny, the thing whispered. Its voice changed at the end. It sounded like Mom again, then it sounded like somebody older. Then it was just wet breathing. Drew pushed me forward. Don't resist. You do it. He grabbed my shoulder. The offering has to be completed. The thing lifted its upper body. I could see the pale skin stretched across its ribs. Water poured off it and ran between the boards. It opened its mouth wider. Irene came out of the mudroom carrying the rope. The metal hook dragged behind her. It scraped against the dock and made a sharp sound. Drew turned when he heard it. Don't. Irene ran. She had the rope wrapped around one arm and held the hook in her other hand. Drew pulled me sideways, trying to put himself between us and the creature. Irene didn't slow down. The thing reached for me. She drove the hook into its throat. The point went through one of the mouth flaps and came out behind it. Irene pulled back with both hands. The rope went tight. The thing made a sound that wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. It was high and deep at the same time. The dock shook under my feet. The thing thrashed. One of its limbs struck the boards and cracked one of them. Black water and blood sprayed across Irene's jacket. She held on. The debt has already been paid, she shouted. It already took my hands. The gauze around her hand tore loose. I saw it then. 2 of her fingers were missing. The ends were covered with old scars. She had kept that hand closed whenever I was around. I thought she was hiding the bandage. The thing pulled against the hook. Irene's boots slid toward the water. I grabbed the rope below her hands. It was thick and rough and wet. Together we pulled back, but the thing was stronger than both of us. Drew seized my sweatshirt again. Let go of the rope. No! He pulled me away from Irene. The rope jerked and burned my palms. Irene fell to one knee but didn't release it. The thing turned its head. I don't know how it did that with the hook through its throat. It looked at Drew instead of me. The 3 flaps of its mouth opened and shut around the metal. Drew took 1 step backward. Wait. The thing reached for him. Drew grabbed the dock railing with both hands, his fingers wrapped around the wet wood. The creature caught him around the waist and pulled. Drew! He held on. His boots dragged over the boards. The railing creaked and bent under his weight. Irene pulled me away from him. Get off the dock. I'm not leaving him. You can't help him. Drew looked at me. His face was gray and his mouth was open, but no words came out. The thing dragged him another foot. The railing pulled loose at one end. Go! Irene yelled. The wood snapped. Drew went into the lake. The creature followed him. The hook tore free from its throat and landed on the dock with the rope still tied to it. The thing and Drew went down together. The water closed over them with a heavy splash. Irene pulled me toward shore. I looked back once. The lake was already flat again. There was no sign of Drew. The rope lay across the dock and the hook was dark with blood. Keep moving, Irene said. We ran through the mud toward the car. I slipped once and went down on one hand, but Irene pulled me back up before I could stop. The cabin behind us was broken open and one headlight shone through the trees. The other one had gone dark. Irene reached the damaged car and grabbed the door. By the time we got back to the main road, the sun was coming up. I couldn't tell how long we'd been driving before that. The night at the lake had ended all at once, but my body still felt like it was back on the dock. My hands hurt from pulling on the rope. My knees were wet and covered with mud. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Drew going over the railing. The car was damaged on the front and along the passenger side. The windshield had a crack running across it, and the hood was bent up enough that I could see part of the road through the gap. Irene drove on anyway. The engine sounded bad. It made a grinding noise whenever she pressed the gas. The steering wheel shook in her hand, but she didn't slow down much. She had wrapped her injured hand in a bandage. It was thick and white around the 2 missing fingers. Her other hand stayed on the wheel. Every so often, she looked over to check on me. You okay, little fish? I'm alive. I know. Is Drew dead? Irene looked back at the road. There was nobody on it in either direction. The trees on either side were dark and wet from the night. The lake took him. That means dead. It means we don't go back to find out. I looked through the cracked windshield. The sky was turning gray over the road ahead of us. There were no houses, no trucks, no power lines that I could see. Just trees and the road going south. Irene drove with her bandaged hand resting low on the wheel. She didn't seem to notice the blood that had soaked through in one small spot near her wrist. Maybe she did notice it. She'd spent years knowing what her hands looked like and what they could do. You said the debt was already paid, I said. I said it because it was true. How? She was quiet for a while. The engine rattled under the hood. A piece of broken glass slid around in the door whenever we went over a bump. I paid 2 fingers when I was 14, she said. I know. No, you saw what was left. You didn't know what it meant. I didn't say anything. Irene kept watching the road. The first payment gives you standing in the family. It gives you the right to make a later payment for somebody else. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to make sense to you, it only has to be part of the bargain. I looked at her bandage. You traded your fingers for me? Not exactly. Then what did you trade them for? She took a breath. She took a breath and tried to explain it without using the words she hated. I paid early, she said, and I paid out of turn. That gave me the right to replace you when the time came. But you already paid. I paid a piece, the family still owed the rest. The rest of you. She nodded. The road dipped and the car bounced, sending my shoulder into the door. Irene tightened her grip on the wheel and kept going. The car smelled like gasoline and wet clothes. There was mud on the floor and a dark smear across the side of the seat where I had grabbed it getting in. "The family can't just refuse the debt," she said. "That's what they kept trying to tell you. They can't decide the bargain is over because they don't like it. They can't leave the lake without giving it what it's owed." "Then why did you say you could replace me?" "Because I could." "You said you paid early." "I did." "How does that let you replace me?" She glanced at me. "I paid before the lake called for the rest of me. I paid before my turn was complete. That matters." I couldn't see how it mattered. It was like trying to get out of a bill by paying part of it and then giving the bill to someone else. The adults in my family had spent my whole life telling me that things had to be done a certain way. They never explained who made the rules or what happened if somebody said no. Irene had said no anyway. "Your place was given to me," I said. "Yes." "So that means I was your replacement?" "Yes." "Then how did you replace me?" She glanced at the bandaged hand for half a second. "I used the payment I'd already made." The car shook again. Somewhere under the hood, something scraped against metal. "I told the lake it could have what was owed to me," she said. "I gave it a complete replacement instead. Drew was there. He knew what I was doing." "Drew brought me there." "I know." "He tried to push me into the lake." "I know that too." "Then why did the lake take him?" Irene's mouth tightened. "Because I changed the payment." I looked at her. "It accepted you as my replacement," she said. "Then it took Drew as the final collection." "Why Drew?" "He was the one who brought you. He was the one who kept you there. He knew what the family was doing and helped them do it." "That doesn't mean the lake gets him." "It didn't care what we thought it meant." She said it like that was the whole answer. Maybe it was. Drew had spent all night talking about what the lake wanted. He'd said the offering had to be completed. He'd said the lake would become violent if I resisted. Then it had reached past me and taken him instead. I still didn't like it. "Is it over?" I asked. Irene didn't answer right away. "Is the bargain over?" "Blackfen Sanchez is quiet." "That isn't what I asked." "I know." She drove another mile before she spoke again. The road was getting lighter now. The trees had thinned out in places, and I could see fields beyond them. The car's headlights were still on, even though we didn't need them anymore. "The lake took Drew," she said. "It took what I gave it. That should be enough." "Should be?" "I don't know how long the silence will last." I looked behind us through the cracked rear window. The road curved between the trees. There was nothing following us. "What happens if it doesn't last?" "Then we deal with that when it happens." "How?" "I don't know." That was the first time Irene had said she didn't know without sounding angry about it. She kept both eyes on the road. The bandage around her hand had started to loosen near the thumb. "Nobody will touch your hands," she said. I turned toward her. "You hear me, little fish? Nobody will touch your hands. Not Mom, not Dad, not the family, not anything in that lake." "What if they try?" "Don't let them." "I tried last night." "You got out." "I almost didn't." "But you did." The road continued south. We passed a broken sign leaning in the weeds, but I couldn't read what it said. Irene drove past it without looking. Her shoulders were stiff, and her hair had dried in tangled pieces around her face. "Don't ever let anyone drive you north again," she said. About 4 hours later, we reached the highway. The road had gotten wider a while before that. The trees pulled back and there were fields on both sides, then gas stations and signs and power lines. It took me a few minutes to notice the phone had service again. I glanced at it in my lap. There were 4 bars. I hadn't seen 4 bars since we left home. I wasn't even sure I'd had 1 bar since we turned onto the county road. The phone had been more like a small glass tile than a phone for the last few days. It had a clock and a flashlight and a battery that kept getting lower, but it couldn't call anybody. Now it could. I opened the contacts. Mom and Dad were both there. I stared at their names for a while without touching either one. Irene kept driving. The car was still making the grinding noise under the hood. The front end shook whenever she went over a rough patch, and the cracked windshield made the highway look like it had a long gray line running through the middle of it. "We should call them," I said. Irene didn't look over. "No." "Why?" "Because we're not calling them. They'll know we left. They should know." "Then why not call?" She kept her bandaged hand low on the steering wheel. The white cloth had loosened around the missing fingers, and there was a small red mark near the edge of it. Her other hand was at the top of the wheel. She drove like she was afraid the car might come apart if she let go. "They'll have to face what they did," she said. I looked at the phone again. Mom would answer if I called, or maybe Dad would. They'd ask where I was. They'd tell me to come back. They'd say there'd been a mistake, or that I had it wrong, or that everything was required. They'd probably use my nickname. I put the phone back in my lap. "You're not calling them either?" "No." "What if they call us?" "Don't answer." I nodded, although she wasn't looking at me. The highway went south through the trees. There weren't many cars. Every so often a truck came the other way and pushed a rush of air against us. Then the road was empty again. I kept expecting to feel different because we were out. I figured once we reached a real road I'd stop being scared. Or maybe I'd stop listening for water. Neither one happened. I still heard the lake when the tires made a wet sound against the pavement. I still looked at the back seat whenever something shifted. Mud covered the floor, and blood marked the seat. Irene's jacket was stiff where the black water had dried on it. The rope burn across my palms had started to hurt more now that I wasn't using them. I looked at her bandaged hand. "You lost them when you were 14. "Yes." "You were my age." "Yes." "How did Mom and Dad let that happen?" Irene watched the highway. "They didn't let it happen. They took you there." "They brought me there." "That's the same thing." She didn't argue with me. Her silence hurt more than an argument would have. The sun had gotten higher. It came through the windshield and made the broken glass shine. Irene's face looked tired in the light. There was dried blood at her hairline that she hadn't cleaned off. "You gave the lake your fingers so you could replace me," I said. "I gave it part of what it was owed." "And that gave you the right?" "It gave me standing." I hated that word. It sounded like ledger language, something adults used when they wanted a bad thing to sound like a rule. "Standing to do what?" "To make the payment." "That doesn't mean anything." "It means I paid early. I paid out of turn. When the lake called for the rest of me, I could give it someone else instead." "Me?" "Yes." She said it plainly. There was no way to make it sound better. I turned toward the window. The fields outside were flat and brown. A few fence posts leaned along the road. I wondered if the people who owned the fields knew what was north of them. I wondered if they knew what their quiet town was protected from. "The bargain isn't over," I said. Irene took a breath. "It should be." "That's not what I said." "I know. The lake took Drew. It took your fingers. It got paid. It got paid enough. Enough isn't the same as over." "No." The car rattled over a bridge. Underneath it there was a narrow creek with brown water moving between the weeds. I watched it until it disappeared behind us. Irene didn't say anything for a while. "We got out," she said. "That doesn't mean it's done." "No, it doesn't." Her voice was quiet. She didn't try to tell me it would be fine. I liked that better than the things Mom used to say when I kept asking questions. I checked the phone once more. The bars were still there. A message from Mom had come through while we were out of range. It only said, Call me. I read it twice. Then I locked the phone and held it in my hand without calling. Irene drove south. The highway stretched ahead of us, and the damaged car kept making its bad metal sound, but it moved. I looked back through the rearview mirror. The trees had closed in behind us. Farther back, the land was dark and flat. Blackfen Sanchez stayed there without moving, the lake quiet somewhere beyond the road, and the houses and the trees. It had taken Drew. It had taken 2 fingers from Irene years ago. It had almost taken me. I was alive, but we had paid for it. Irene's bandaged hand rested on the wheel beside me. The cloth covered what was missing, but it couldn't hide it from either of us. She kept driving, and I kept the phone in my hand. The road carried us south.